Hello, inmates, and welcome to the cellblock Scorch week number 218B. This is Bones, and I'm recording as the winner of this week's Scorch. This week's prompt was given by Octo, and it was, "Please stop believing in me at your earliest convenience. Thank you." Okay, so the piece I'll be reading is part of a larger universe that I've written a couple of Scorches for. The first time I wrote about them was week 132, so this isn't my first piece with them, but it's the first you're going to be hearing about them due to the way we're releasing episodes. So I'm going to give you a quick heads up before about a few things that you should otherwise know about the characters, and I'll tell you more about the world itself afterwards. So you'll meet them in the piece, but this one only has two characters appearing, Bin and Rhoda. So quick things you need to know before. Bin is the god of chaos and is ever-changing. Thus, their pronouns change throughout the entirety of this piece. Just so you know, don't be fooled into thinking there are more than two people there. It's just the two of them. Rhoda's power isn't really gone into, but it is referenced, so FYI, things blow up when she swears. That's her power. Okay, so I'll get more into the world after, but I think that's all you need to know. So, the name of this Scorch is Please Don't. Rhoda was not a god. Was not, is not, never will be a god. Did Bin have a really good argument for her being a god? Well, yes, but only because any random person could be a god by their definition. What kind of stupid rule was it that a god only needed one worshipper, and it could be themselves? Really shot herself in the foot when she built that tiny shrine and put her name on it as a joke. Could she travel to the godly realm, Langit? No, because there was no such thing as a godly realm. Could she teleport to a place that had stupidly powerful people who lived there called Langit because they all had god complexes? Yeah. Didn't make them gods, didn't make it a godly realm, just made them egotists. Just made the book she periodically forgot was a portal and teleported her whenever she opened it, wondering what it was, a really stupid prank. It wasn't the only magic book in the world. Basically, despite what Bin said, she was not a god. It's not like the god of chaos should be put in charge of hiring anyway. It would be exactly what he wanted. Unfortunately, their logic was the type that none could refute. Not because it was right, but because it was so wrong that no one could possibly start to unravel it. And in the end, it's not like it mattered anyway. First of all, she didn't appear in any sort of books about the gods, and she'd only been declared one by a god with exactly one follower a few years prior. Therefore, it wasn't like anyone was ever going to hear about her or worship her. More importantly, she might actually kill anyone who decided it was a good idea to worship the god of atheism. She had been a nominal god for only 5 years when she awoke suddenly in the middle of the night with a weird, tingly sensation all over her body. Of course, the first assumption was that she was having a stroke. It probably worried her less than it should have. But after the initial confusion of waking up, she noticed that there wasn't really any pain, and she didn't have a problem moving. What the? She cut off right before saying something that she would regret. Not because she didn't want to swear, but because the last thing she wanted was for her desk to shatter. She'd only just gotten it replaced. Oh, you feel that? Gah! She yelled at the unexpected voice, flailing to her feet in a manner that would have only saved her from an attacker if they took a whole minute to be perplexed at her jerky movements. Luckily, this was not an attacker. But there was soon to be one if Bin kept grinning at her like that. "You broke into my house?" They took a moment to both silently acknowledge that she was living in a tent that didn't have so much as a zipper to force open. "Yes," Bin confirmed. "Isolde is in the other one," she grumbled, absent-mindedly shaking out her hands like that would disperse the tingling throughout her whole body. Bin should know this by now. They'd gotten a second tent a few months ago now. "I'm here for you," she grinned, looking entirely too pleased. Rhoda had never tackled the god before, seeing as it just wasn't her style, but she'd seen Issa do it plenty of times. It seemed like an appropriate response at the moment, though that might have been the 2 hours of sleep talking. "You feel it, don't you?" Bin continued before Rhoda decided to actually tackle them. "Feel... Oh, this is your fault then," she sighed, laying back down, face first on the bedroll. Even though she hadn't been worried before, knowing that it was Bin's doing meant there was absolutely nothing to fear. He was much more interested in mild discomfort than actual injury, and it would probably subside before it even became more than a small annoyance. "Well," Bin dragged out, "you could say that, but strictly speaking, you'd be wrong." "You don't speak strictly," Rhoda muttered, hardly paying attention anymore. "Excuse you!" Bin's hand flew to their chest in indignation. "Semantics are a major source of chaos. I always speak strictly." Rhoda hummed in return, already drifting back to sleep. The tingle was still present, but the desire to sleep was stronger. Bin was on the bed next to her now, taking over most of the room despite being smaller than her. He grinned at her proffered glare. "You've got a worshipper," they reported giddily. Rhoda's eyes slid open. Instead of responding, she lifted her hands and started steadily pressing Bin off the bedroll. Bin protested loudly about shooting the messenger, but didn't really resist, soon finding herself on the floor. Unfortunately, the bedroll was already on the floor, so it wasn't much of a change. Rhoda would have liked to hear them hit the ground, but the symbolism was there. She turned her back to the symbolically fallen god, wrapping the blanket tight and resolving to ignore him. "Come on, you can't ignore your worshipper. You only have two now." The first, of course, was herself. But that was beside the point because she wasn't a god, and there was no way that anyone else was worshipping her. "How would you even know?" Bin made some vague hand gestures and completely avoided the question. Rhoda didn't even have to look to know at this point. "I'm kind of magic, just like everyone else in the world. The point is that you just got a power-up, and it's rude not to return a gift," they lectured. Despite herself, Rhoda turned over to glare at him. Bin wasn't even trying to hide the grin splitting their face. "You want to see whoever it is that decided to worship an atheism god, don't you?" Bin nodded happily. What could be more chaotic than worshipping a god literally because you don't believe in gods? Then go yourself. It's got nothing to do with me. "Rhoda," Bin wailed, flopping onto her pitifully. "I can't locate other people's worshippers. You just gotta think about it, and you'll know where they are. Just tell me, and I'll go myself. Issa and I can take a field trip. Issa will not be meeting someone who says they worship me. I have a duty to my worshippers, Bin lied blatantly. I cannot lie to them. So, you can either let us both go, or you can have us both annoy you until you do, she grinned. Sometimes, Rhoda thought it would be better to return to society and get a real bed and a door that she could at least pretend could keep people away from her. Fine, but bring them a message from me. Oh, Bin bounced in excitement, thrown by this turn of events. It took only a moment for Rhoda to scribble out a message after dragging herself over to the desk, handing the scrap of paper and the location of the poor sod over at the same time. On the paper was written the following, which Bin read immediately, right in front of Rhoda, of course. Worshipper, please stop believing me at your earliest convenience. Thank you. She hadn't even bothered with punctuation or capitalization. Truly a satirical masterpiece.
Hey, this is Octo. I judged the Scorch this week, and I get to comment on it. I'm excited to do it, because I really, really liked this one. I'd like to preface this by saying that it just really wasn't a fair fight at all. The other Scorch this week was written by a Rev, and it was also really good, but the secret trick is that I actually knew all the secret lore that hopefully Bones will tell you about, because it's all really good secret lore for these characters and this universe. And therefore, when it came to judging it, I was filled with such joy and glee upon reading it, and reading about Rhoda and Bin, that I immediately blacked out and chose it as the winner. I really enjoy the universe. I think it's really interesting and unique, and I like the way that Bones has gone and set it up. And I also really like Rhoda as a character. I think she's perhaps the funniest person on the planet. Like, here she is, this person who is utterly convinced that the literal gods that you in this universe can see, you can literally find them wherever. You can literally talk to them. She is convinced that they are in fact just people with magic powers, which, like, isn't wrong, but is wrong enough that she's just a little bit insane, and I appreciate that for her. And the idea of somebody accidentally ascending to godhood who doesn't even believe that gods exist is just inherently funny, inherently just wild. Like, the stars really aligned to ruin Rhoda's life there, and it was great. And the fact that she can't even technically deny it anymore, but just does. Amazing. And Bin being there eating popcorn the whole time is just chef's kiss. 10 out of 10. I love this universe a lot, and I'm excited to read it in its entirety when Bones gets around to writing the whole book. And I hope that you guys enjoyed it too, and that Bones gave you all that lore, because it's great lore. So keep that fire burning.
And that's it. Okay, a note before going on. The teleporting book was actually inspired by a Skyrim book. So Octo plays Skyrim, and she's got this book on one of her characters that, if you open it, teleports you to this like weird hell dimension. And she forgets all the time that this is the book and this is what it does. So she'll be like going through her inventory and be like, what is this? Why do I have this? And she'll click on it and it'll open, and she'll all of a sudden be teleported to this hell dimension. And then she'll be like, oh, it's this book. Why do I have this? And like slam it shut and be teleported back to the normal place, you know. So the book that Rhoda has that randomly transports her to Langit and she keeps forgetting about it is a call out to that Skyrim book, because I think it's absolutely hilarious. Okay, onto the actual world. So there's clearly a lot going on here. I'm not going to go into the actual plot of the potential story, especially because this piece takes place after the events of the theoretical book that I haven't written, but I'll tell you a bit about the world itself. So, obviously, it's a fantasy world where there are gods, or at least very important people worshipped as gods, if you ask Rhoda and Isolde. It started as just one, and one god creates others, etc., etc. There are a truly ludicrous amount of gods. For instance, there used to be just Duta, the god of nature, but then she created gods for water, earth, air, etc. And the water god created gods for oceans, rivers, etc. To the point that there's like a god of mist, a god of drizzling rain, a god of flash floods, all just under the water god. So, like, you see where this is going. Gods beget gods beget gods, and now there are so many of them. One for pretty much anything you can imagine, and the older they are, the more powerful because they're over more things. Like, Duta can still control all of nature, even though there are more specific gods over different parts of it now. And the more specific the gods are, the less power they have, basically. Or rather, the more specific their domain, so they likely have less power because they can manipulate or whatever less things, you know? Also, the gods and all their stuff isn't nonsense words. They're actually named Hillegainen words, a lot of which are super self-explanatory if you happen to know Hillegainen. I started this pretty soon after I came back from living in the Philippines for a year and a half, and I'd learned Hillegainen while there, and Tagalog to a lesser extent. But it's a super pretty language. I love it, and so the gods are all named Hillegainen words that correlate with their purview, basically. So, for example, in this piece, some of the Hillegainen words are Langit, which is the home of the gods, which is what they call heaven. In Hillegainen. And Bin is actually short for Binuang, which is basically crazy person, actually, but it feels totally apt for the god of chaos. Rhoda, it's important to note, is not a Hillegainen word. She's just got like a normal person name because, as stated, she was not a god at the beginning of this adventure. And those are the only gods here, but I've also mentioned Duta, which means earth, and yeah, she's the nature goddess. So even though the gods have their own like place, Langit, to just chill, they're super involved in everyday life. Every person has a gift, which is basically magic powers. They come in all varieties. And they call the magic gifts because they believe, and it is true, that the magic is given by a god. So any of the gods can bless a baby with a gift. The most powerful ones do it the most, because they are asked the most. But like, gods can come without asking, without being asked as well. Like if the parents pray to a specific god to bless their child, then it's more likely that that god will come, but some gods are scrubs and they're not going to show up. And all babies get a blessing, so it just depends on if another big god wants to come by and help out, or if, like, some random little god over something you've never even heard of shows up and blesses your child with, I don't know, like, the ability to control aglets, you know? But yeah, it's really kind of a crapshoot based on what god comes and gives you magic. Anyway, and like, it does generally correlate to how powerful the god is, but for example, like, they can give power to someone over anything. So like, Duna could give someone power over all nature to an extent, or just water, or just rain, but the god of rain can only give rain related powers. So they can give power over anything within their purview, and that gets bigger the older the god is. So, as I mentioned before, Rhoda's power makes things blow up when she swears. Isolde, who you didn't meet, has this aura about them that makes people vaguely uncomfortable for no reason. Not the best gifts, and they have no idea what gods cursed them with said powers, which is a plot point that I won't get into right now. But basically, they got some crappy powers, and that is a large part of the reason that they're mad at the gods. Rhoda insists that gods don't exist at all, that they're just people with god complexes. Isolde is arguably more gracious, but perhaps more condescending, in that they say that a powerful person would be practically indistinguishable from a god, so they might as well be, which is really just kind of a nicer way of saying they're just people. As for kind of what got them roped into this godly business in the first place, how they met Bin, the god of chaos, Isolde found a rundown shrine in a forest that said Bin on the side and started worshipping them for like kicks and giggles, only to find out later that Bin was not only real but actually the god of chaos, and nothing could be more apt than to worship them thinking that it wasn't real. Meanwhile, Rhoda mockingly made a birdhouse and wrote her name on it and called it a shrine so that she could be like, see, does this make me a god? And ironically, it actually does, according to Min, and she ascends to godhood as the god of atheists, much to her chagrin. Anyway, as I've mentioned, I've written several stories with this group of people, and the tag on Patreon for it is Ardent Agnostics. The ones so far are from weeks 132, 172, and 214, so they won't be up for a while yet. Of those, only 172 was a winning Scorch, so that will eventually be featured on the podcast, but you can get access to the runner-up Scorches as a Spark level supporter on our Patreon. The prompt I gave for next week was, "You're kind, and that's exactly why it's so cruel." This is another example of me wanting to see something tragic, because that's apparently what I live for. You gotta, feel something. So that'll be the prompt for 219A. And let me tell you, everyone delivered for that one, so look forward to it. It's really good. Also, shout out to Jillybean3369 for always commenting on our episodes. I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I always love to hear what people like about our different stories. Also, it was pointed out to me that Peishi mentioned a fairy tale reference in my last episode, week 7 CBD, and I didn't explain what it was, so I'll tell anyone who's interested now. In Fairy Tale, one of the main characters, Lucy, had a doll as a kid, and she named it Gonzalez. So when Xander was throwing out ideas as to what his imaginary friend's name may have been, he offers up Gonzalez as one of the options, and that was the reference that Peishi was referring to. All right, thank you for the questions and comments. I love getting them and responding. That's all I have for this week, so thank y'all for listening, and keep your fires burning. The Cellblock Scorch is a production of Stellacore, an independent group of nerds sharing their obsessions with the world. We can be reached at thestellacore@gmail.com, through comments on your podcast platform of choice, our Instagram, Stella_core, and at our YouTube, also called Stellacore. Feel free to check out our other productions on our YouTube channel, or our cosplays on Instagram. If you would like to support our creative endeavors, you can give a one-time tip to the Ko-Fi of the writer of your favorite Scorches, or check out our Patreon, linked in the show notes. There, you can access the winning Scorches and episode transcripts for free, or sign up for Spark level support for $5 a month to gain access to all of the Scorch submissions.